Hey everyone, we're talking about the trials and tribulations of what it means to learn art, what it means to be an artist. My name is Justin Donaldson.
I'm Grace Winstead.
And I'm Rachel Dene.
And this is the Paint and Pixels podcast. All right, so today we're going to talk about style. Let's start off with a little open discussion. What is style? What does that mean to you guys? Like, how do we find it? How do we make it? Where does it come from?
To me, I consider style kind of the culmination of all of the choices you make with your art. So, finding my style for me was figuring out what particular choices I want to make to sort of create the look in my art that I love and will help me communicate sort of the things that I want to communicate. So, for me, that ends up being like I choose to typically I work digitally.
Right.
I choose to have a very sort of cinematic look. I like that kind of movie lighting, right? Like, that has a very different look than like fine art lighting or something like that.
Right.
I choose to make my characters relatively simplified in 2D. Just sort of all those different choices that I make that kind of comes together to give me my style is how I see style.
Yeah, I think I see it. I see that. I definitely see that. I think there's a quality of it that is a little less intentional sometimes. That is
Mhm.
more like what are you focusing on in like the minute by minute production of art? Like I know for me, I focus a lot on values, and so my art's always going to have a certain way that I like process through values, and I think about it, and I use that as a way of achieving what I'm trying to achieve. But at the same time, there are going to be people who do, like people who use a lot more line work than I
Mhm.
do are going to be going through very different, like moment by moment mental processes to get what it is that they want. And I think that comes into your style. That
Mhm.
comes into your style a lot. And so there's like, what am I intending and what do I want? And then there's just like, I almost think about it like how were you taught art? And what are your main thoughts about how to get what you want with your art? Like those things, I think they're all gonna come together and culminate to make and contribute to your style. Um, yeah, so I think that there's this very conscious style that you kind of go for, and then there's a very unconscious style that's kind of just made up of all the different little parts.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that unconscious style is I think where you get a lot of that. Like you'll see a lot of advice that's like, don't look for your style, it'll find you, right?
Right.
Or don't worry about style because everybody already has a style. And for me, that advice didn't help me at all. And I think that's just there is no one size fits all kind of advice that'll
No.
for every artist. And that advice did not help me at all. For me, I had to specifically go out and do a lot of like sort of artistic soul searching to kind of find my style, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. And yeah, I had to do that. And I feel like that advice comes from the fact that there are sort of unconscious style choices that we make. They're almost kind of like I don't even know how you would get rid of them. They're kind of like the fingerprint of how you personally create art, right? Like it's
Yeah.
going to be really hard for me to draw something and it not, no matter what I'm drawing, not have that fingerprint. I think those are those like unconscious style aspects to art versus like the sort of more conscious choices that you make that you could kind of change for any one piece if you wanted to.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's a lot of surface level. Like I want it to look like this, I want it to feel like that, but you're you're still going to go through a lot of the same processes to get it that way. And that's why I think, when you're talking about your fingerprint, you can like use different mediums and try for different styles, and probably someone's still going to be able to look at it all and be like, yeah, that's pretty cohesive. Like that's all
Mhm.
pretty well the same. And there's this advice out there that I think has a lot of good merit to it. That's essentially like paint what you love or paint what you. I think more like people are like, well, what do you draw and what do you paint in your downtime? Like when you're not like really trying to produce things, like look in your sketchbook and what are you drawing and painting the most? And trying to tell you that that's like exactly what you should be focusing on. And I think that there's some good merit to that. But at the same time, I kind of think like, well, I got really comfortable drawing the things that I was taught how to draw, or sort of like really worked my way through. Um, that it doesn't always correlate to like exactly what I like and exactly what I love. It's just like my first teacher like told me that this is how I do it. And so now from now on in, like this is how I do it. And I haven't thought about it in like 5 to 10 years. And I just do it now. And so I think a lot of that, like it requires a lot of unearthing and stepping backwards a little bit to like change those kind of things. But yeah, so I think there's a bit of give and take. Like in some way, yeah, that's exactly how I do it, and that's what my style looks like. And in some way, it's like, I don't know, step back and actually like make the choice rather than just do it the way that you've always done it.
Yeah.
So it's really just a combination of habits. If you look at it,
Yeah, I
it's a
think so.
combination of the habits that you pick up while you study art and the habits that you've developed, like since you were born, about what interests you, what you pay attention to.
Yeah, it's a lot about habits. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think so long as you're able to like see that and then step back when you want to step back.
It's kind of comforting because you can develop new habits, you can break old habits.
Yeah, very true.
I think it's just about being able to sort of, you have your comfort zone. I think we all have our artistic comfort zone, and knowing when you should break that and when that's totally fine. Like for instance, I love to draw characters.
Yeah.
And had I never sort of broken out of my comfort zone, that's still, that will always be me. I will always love to draw characters. They're my favorite thing to draw. But knowing that, like, had I only ever stayed in my character comfort zone, I would only draw like a three-quarter face facing this one direction, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
recognizing that, okay, well, I love to draw characters. My comfort zone, or what my current skill set may be, I may be able to draw a character doing like these three poses. So maybe I should expand sort of my foundational knowledge to be able to draw even more expressions and bring my characters more to life and stuff like that. So I think it's just kind of being able to recognize what is a comfort zone that is good and what needs to be kind of expanded upon and broken out of.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that I know in this podcast we talk a lot about intention and sort of like bringing intention to everything that you do, and that helping to push things and move things forward. And I think that's still really true in this discussion, because I know personally, like I have paintings that really go in the sort of like anime background direction, and then I have paintings that move away from that. Like when I want to paint things that feel a little bit more epic or a little bit more giant mountains and really subtle values, um, I I push away from that kind of more anime background style, and um, and I think a lot of people might tell me not to do that. They might tell me just to like really pick the one thing and communicate that. But um, yeah, I think so long as it's following the intention of the work that I'm trying to make at any given point in time, then that's exactly what I should do is follow that intention rather than just kind of fall on a one particular style and narrow things down so much. And like we're talking about those more unconscious kind of things, like my work, even when it's anime background, even when it's more like like a more classic oil painting, it still kind of holds a lot of the very very same values. Yeah, which brings us into the idea of almost like having a brand or a public identity, like how you communicate yourself across um, to your followers or to whoever it is that is going to be seeing your art. And so, yeah, is there a difference for you in your style between like exactly what it is that you want to do and then the way you present yourself outwardly?
So for me, there's not really actually. I am pretty big on I'm gonna make what I want to make.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to change that for anybody. And I'm going to try to find the people that resonate with just sort of what I personally want to make. So for me, there's really not that big of a difference. I don't let that hold me back. So I know what most of my followers are following me for. I know the topics and the subjects and the look, right, that they like. For instance, my
Right.
sketch work it doesn't do anywhere near as good as my color work. People really, really like sort of my lighting and the sort of mood I bring in with lighting and stuff.
Yeah.
And I will post sketch, and I love to sketch. So sketching, I sketch more than I do anything else. But I don't not post my sketches because I'm worried that my followers are not going to like it as much. I know they're not going to resonate with the sketches as much. I post it anyway. And
Yeah.
I do have people that are like, oh, I actually prefer the sketches. And I'm like, oh, cool, because I love a good sketch. So for me, I don't really actually change much for sort of my brand or my followers versus like what I do stylistically. What I do stylistically just so happens to be what I love to do, and it's what I do. But I also don't let like what my followers like hold me back from trying new stuff too. Like I've always been willing to post something knowing that this is kind of different than maybe what they're used to seeing, and that's just I wanted to try it. So I try very much for me anyway, I try to put the art first, and I try to put the learning and the journey of my art well before my sort of social media brand.
Right.
That's kind of my core is the art. Art's number one.
Yeah. I think that's the way that it should be.
I was going to ask if you did anything differently for like your brand versus your personal stuff.
I think when it comes to my artwork that like I really want to spend time on, they're one and the same. Like I don't really filter out those really sort of really big things. I think that there are places, there are things that I explore, which ends up being kind of more figurative work or more, I don't know, yeah, more figurative, more storytelling kind of work that I just I don't really put out there. But I
Yeah.
think in a lot of ways, it's more like because it's not quite the same quality.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't see it as being quite as good as the rest of things, and yeah, that's something that I'm constantly reaching to integrate into a lot of the work that I do and that I do share and post. Um, but I spent a lot of time not even working on figurative work and not even sort of reaching for that or being able to find my own identity when it comes to that. And so I think that's what it is. Like what I want to share to people are the things that really represent me. And in some ways, in terms of like landscapes, I have found that.
Yeah.
And in some ways, when it comes to figurative work, I'm still feel like I'm pushing through um, between like what are the influences that I actually value? What am I actually trying to do with this work? And what are the things that I want to leave behind that you know I don't think I have a real strong clear identity for me and for my work. And so it's almost like that exploration, like I don't know who I am, so therefore I don't know what to tell you about
Yeah.
who I am when it comes to that stuff. I think that's where I am with that at the moment. And almost for years I've been excited about working into that, but I still haven't quite found exactly who and what I want to be when it comes to figurative work. And so I don't know how to communicate about that. And I know that I could share that journey more, and I probably should. So I don't really have anything conclusive about that, but that's where I am.
That's where I am, except more so. Yeah, I feel like I have a clear idea of the brand or the identity that I'd like to put forward, but I don't have any authority on it right now to speak because other than being other than saying kind of behind the scenes of what you do, so
Yeah.
I'm no more than maybe the average person. For myself, I still don't quite know where my art lies. I mean, I went through some pretty bleak types of like depression.
Yeah.
And during that time, it was, I hate the word, but like influencers are kind of what got me through it.
Yeah.
Not like the paid promotion type of things, but like the people who they act like their followers are a group, sort of a parasocial relationship type
Sure.
of situation. I wasn't delusional enough to think that there was an
Right.
actual back and forth, but I really got a lot of value out of that, and I
Yeah.
would love to be able
You want
to
to turn around.
offer that at some point. And I know that like throughout my life growing up, there was a point where my personality ended up getting like chipped away by
Yeah.
like trauma and stuff. And I can still see that person. I'm like, if I could get that back,
Yeah.
I would have something to offer other people who have been in the same position.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There's, I know for me, it's very, very similar in terms of like the thing that I've needed the most is the thing that I want the most to be able to give back.
Yeah.
It's like the thing I can have most compassion for and the biggest, I don't know, like the things that you've been through, you know them intimately, right? And so like you know that you don't want anyone else to ever have to go through that.
But you can only give what you have, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, that's why I know for you, the most valuable art is the stuff you are able to get that emotion into, right? Like
Yeah.
it's rare sometimes, but it's so valuable. And so I'm still looking for that,
Yeah.
kind of. I haven't like quite nailed down. It has something to do with overactive imagination, probably. And like, I used to really enjoy slipping into like different personas or characters. Like growing up, I used to was the weird kid. I wore like costumes to school.
I
Didn't
love it.
realize how weird it was until people told me. So yeah. Don't know
Yeah, don't
how
listen to
that's gonna
them.
get back to art, but I think it could.
I think it does.
I mean, I know exactly what you're saying because that's kind of like with all of my characters. You know what I mean? It's really fun to be able to kind of slip into that other character and kind of figure out what they're feeling and stuff. That's I think that's kind of common among a lot of artists and creators and stuff like that. I think we all love that sort of letting our imaginations go kind of crazy and
Yeah.
seeing where it'll take us.
It's somewhere between escapism and
Mm-hmm.
then like putting yourself in a really particular spot that you yourself can't actually go, but you want to experience, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
you want to explore that and what that would mean for you.
Mhm.
And so it's almost like somewhere between escapism and then like this hyper engagement. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think you can separate your that sense of like what you need as a person from what you give.
Yeah.
I think that's the only place that you can really truly give in a really high value way.
Maybe that's why some influencers come across sort of shallow.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, because I sort of follow people for years at a time, I have seen certain influencers start out with a very obvious need, and then like they achieve that need in their life, and they sort of become like a it's like they're following the blueprint of their past self instead of adapting to what they are actually into. And you can kind of, it's just a gut feeling. You can
Right,
just
right.
tell that they're now like playing themselves.
Right. They're not
Yeah.
addressing their next
Yeah,
need kind of
I
thing.
won't say exact names, but there have been some influencers who really hid such a huge part of themselves that it's like once that you figured it out, it's like, who have I even been watching?
Right.
Those aren't artists that I'm talking about
Sure.
particularly, but I'm sure that on some level it applies.
Yeah, I think and the same thing of there being like no separation between who you are as a person and your art, what you're communicating. Preferably there's very little distance between those two things. But yeah, I think when we talk about brands, so I think that ends up being a relatively ambiguous word. And so I think we have a better idea about what marketing is, and that idea of marketing, which is like the kind of material you put together. And I've heard one thing that's helped inform my understanding of brand, and that's essentially like marketing is trying to get you to buy a product, but brand is 100% about trying to help you to understand a product or a person, right? And so like it's generally looked upon pretty negatively in artistic circles that like that you're a brand, you are a brand. And I think the only negative part about that idea is if you try to make a brand that's not you, right? And
Yeah.
you try to be something other than who you are and be interested and into things.
The sellout.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
sellout is where you actually stop being yourself and stop being somebody else. And so like you could get yourself into a situation where you're earning money from companies, but I think it really it only comes down to like if you are selling out, if you're pretending to be somebody else in order to do that, I think that's where the problem is, and where you start to get that kind of, like you were talking about, disconnect from what it is that you're actually trying to do and who you are and your art itself. And so they talk about like, yeah, like Mitsubishi will try to get you to buy a car right now, and that's marketing. But Porsche, like when Porsche communicates about itself, it's not trying to get you to buy something right now. It's like it's almost indoctrinating you. It's like when you're young, you hear about Porsche and you see ads about a Porsche, and it's not about trying to get you to buy at any one particular point. It's like by the time you have enough money, you're like, Porsche is amazing. like
Yeah, like I know nothing about cars, but I hear Porsche and I just think fancy. So there's
exactly.
obviously a connection.
And so it's that like it's them trying to get you to understand who they are.
Yeah.
And so you can be a brand in a very healthy manner. That's really just about like, I'm not trying to sell you everything all the time. I'm just trying to get you to understand who I am.
Yeah.
And that in a way means that now you have a way to relate to me. And at any point in time that you decide that what you need is what I have, you will know, right? Like you'll know who you are, you'll know who I am, and all of that kind of stuff.
I think people kind of naturally pull away from labels because humans are so complex, multifaceted, contradictory.
Yeah, right.
So it's really hard to look at someone and think they know exactly what they're saying or about any certain thing because everyone's sort of, what's the word? Everyone's a little bit of a hypocrite, right?
Sure. Yeah. Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Like the way that we think and hold ourselves.
Like there's very few situations where there's not two thoughts. So it's a little strange to have a brand where it's like, this is me.
I don't think,
a person.
I don't think you can ever do that. I don't think you can ever, like you said, we're all really complicated, and I don't even know exactly who I am, let alone like trying to communicate that to you. And so I don't think it's, and I think we have a lot of trouble with this. Is the idea of like, if I decide that I'm going to narrow down what it is that I'm doing in a public fashion, the hard part is saying, I'm going to narrow this down, but I'm not actually narrowing myself down. I'm not getting rid of these other facets of myself. I'm not making myself less complicated, but because we identify with our art and the way that we communicate, we don't want to narrow down anything, because you're like, I am complicated. I am like, I can genuinely be myself in a very wide variety of things. But the problem then is that if we try to communicate everything, people don't have anything to recognize us by, or a way of, I don't know exactly how to say what I'm thinking.
It's probably like introducing yourself to someone.
Sure,
they don't want to know everything at once.
You go in for a really like, hey, I'm Justin, I'm an artist. Like, I have a wife and 2 kids, and I really like music. Like, that's not who I am.
Yeah.
It kind of helps you understand a little bit. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. But if I tell you every detail about my life, 1, you just lose interest. And then 2, you're still like probably not much closer to really grasping who I am. Yeah, so all of that to say that when I think about branding, I don't really think about necessarily like particular colors like you were talking about. Although that's that is helpful. And I have particular colors that I use, like on my website and in my emails. Like I have this blue to it, and it's not because I love blue, and it's not because like I don't think I even really put a great deal of thought into symbolism or anything. It's 100% just about like recognition. Like, can they open the email or the website and just immediately go, oh yeah, like it's just a manner of communicating consistently, and it doesn't actually represent me in any particular way. Okay, Grace, how did you find your style?
How did I find my style? Okay. So, we were talking earlier, and I think there's that sort of unconscious aspect of style that's just sort of, it's the way you draw. It's sort of hallmarks of how you're always going to draw, and it's going to be really hard to shake those. But I think that there are a lot of practical, sort of conscious things you can do to find your style, right?
Yeah.
So for me, all of the advice, like I said earlier, the like, well, don't even worry about style. It'll find you. That was crap for me. It didn't work for me. And I spent a lot of years really focusing on foundations and stuff and trying to just get technically good. So much so that I never really stopped to think about what I wanted to make. And
Yeah.
in the past like couple of years, probably more like a year and a half, I decided, I was like, well, what do I want to make? What would make me happy when I make this? What would make me happy? So I actually started to do a whole lot of just collecting artists that I liked. I made a huge Pinterest board, and it's just filled now. And it's so funny because if you look at it, it was actually one of our friends that was in your Discord. I'd sent it to her, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, this is just so you." Like you can see it when you look through my big like art inspo Pinterest board, and it's got tons of different artists. I mean, it's not like just one artist, right? It's got a bunch of different, but they all have these very similar look, right? There's this very
Yeah.
cohesive look. And so I went and I collected and I found a bunch of artists. I'm like, oh, I really like what they're doing. And I started kind of breaking down sort of more practically, like, what are these artists doing that if I were to make any one of these pieces, I would be so happy. I would be like, yes, I would be happy to make this. I got with my husband and I was like, okay, what are some of the things, like the things you're noticing similarities in this? And a lot of it was like practical, like sort of practical stuff. It was like really, really punchy values. I noticed that a lot of stuff I liked had very punchy, like contrasting values. A lot of concept art from like 3D animated movies. So you would have these kind of really simplified characters, right? Because they're kind of cartoony, but they would have this light like a movie because they were being made for movies, right? This is
Right.
concept art for movies. And I was noticing that I had a lot of that stuff, a lot of stuff that looked like film lighting. It didn't look like I don't think I have anything on my art inspo board that's like super old masters or any of that kind of look, that super artsy look. It's a lot of like movie look, and almost everything was like really cartoony characters and stuff. And I would just kind of break down sort of the different stuff. And it wasn't like it wasn't like it would be like I would pick and choose, right? Like I'd see something and I'd be like, oh, I love the way they did the light in that, but I don't really like the way they did the characters and stuff like
Right.
that. And it was sort of this kind of just building, finding, I call it ingredients, like for my own, like making my own recipe, right? It was like I was finding all these ingredients from other artists that I loved. It was tons of different artists and figuring out, then I would go and I would try to find ways to like apply it. Like I would do applied studies. And that was probably sort of like practically, like sort of just giving you practical advice, how I found sort of my style and sort of what I like to do was I actually went out and tried to look and see what I love that other artists were doing and then how I could apply that to my own art.
Yeah. I think for me the idea of don't worry about style, I think that the point where that is a good thing to talk about and a good thing to do is the point where you don't have the fundamentals
Yes. Yeah, I
and
totally agree.
you're like, so you might be something like, how do I draw a chin? At that point, don't worry about style. Learn
Yes.
what a chin is,
I
right?
totally agree. I did all of this by the time I had spent years on fundamentals. I had
Yeah.
a really solid idea of I totally agree with that. I do think there is a point where a lot of new artists want to sort of forsake learning all the boring fundamentals so that they can just smack style over it and be like, well, no, it's my style. And that's not what I'm talking about at all. My
Right. Absolutely.
style search came after I had a really solid foundation. I had a really solid foundation to build upon. And from there, sort of finding my style was and it made it funner and easier too, because I wasn't struggling with everything I was trying to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, in a couple different ways, like, style probably shouldn't be an excuse.
Yeah.
I think you should be able to you should work on style after you know how to do what it is that you're trying to do, like
Yeah.
whatever you're trying to do. And then style almost as a simplification, but you kind of need that basis.
Yeah.
The style, I think, like we're talking about, it's the things that you choose, the things you value, and you should take those fundamentals and then work out the same thing we talk about a lot in this. What are you trying to do? And your style should come from what are you trying to do, and what is your intention when you're trying to communicate, rather than answering the question of what is it.
Yeah.
For me, finding my style, it was difficult. Like I said before, I'm not particularly locked into any like really heavily any one particular way of doing things. I care more about what it is that I'm trying to do rather than what style I'm communicating or coming across with. But for me, it was a lot about unlearning the things that I thought that I should do, or the things that I thought I should be. Um, which were just like we were talking about, that were getting in the way of actually understanding what it is that I'm trying to do. And then thinking, because I at the point that I was like really trying to find a style, I was also trying to find a job. And so there's this very natural train of thought of like, okay, what is out there at the moment in sort of production land? Like, are we trying to make Hearthstone images, or like Magic the Gathering images, and what they look like, and therefore what should I do? And sort of going down that road, I don't think has actually been very helpful for many people.
Yeah.
And like I hear that story and it's really common, and it's definitely something that I did in trying to find a style, and therefore looking out and seeing what is around. But yeah, I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's useful, because then again, you're kind of forsaking yourself as a brand, as an identity, as a whatever it is that you're trying to do. And then by forsaking yourself, you just do a terrible job at what it is you're doing, because there's somebody out there for whom that is exactly what they want. And that's exactly what they're doing. And that's like 100% representative of them. And they will always be better than you.
Yeah.
Like
It's
they're
so
going to get the job.
hard to wrap your identity around what somebody else wants, because
Exactly.
you're trying to sell your art, and like you say, it's just never gonna be as good as just being authentically yourself.
Yeah. And that's it. One of the problems is it's really hard.
Mhm.
It's really hard, first of all, to know who you are and what you want, to be honest with yourself about who you are and what you want.
Mhm.
And then to actually integrate and apply, well, what does that mean for my art? And then to have the time to actually be able to do all of
Yeah,
that
that's
and
my
not have to go get a
problem.
job. And then the hard part is the fact that like once it's done and out there, you don't get to control how other people see it and what they take away
Yeah.
from it.
Yes.
And so it's really hard, because like we're trying to communicate something, but you just can't control what the other person hears. Like all we can do is control intent, and what we think is going to happen at the end.
Yeah.
So style, one way to look at style is that it's kind of the outcome of reducing, right? So like we have what's in front of us, and to get it onto a piece of paper or to a computer, we have to reduce it into simpler elements. And so style in some way comes from the fact that we have to reduce, that we have to sort of break and boil something down into a much more manageable way of doing things. And it's the fact that when we do that, that has an effect, right? That is what kind of in a way turns out as style. And one way to explore style is to recognize that there's a whole bunch of qualities. And when you reduce down into certain qualities, it's going to look and feel a certain way. So let me be more specific. I think something like color So you can kind of have a style when it comes to color, and maybe what you're doing is reducing down in color to like, we're just using like reds and yellows and really tight kinds of color, and then that's going to come out as a style, because you're taking away the other varieties of different hues and colors and stuff. And so that's where things become really interesting. And so if you want to explore style, you want to set yourself challenges of reducing to say, hey, like I'm gonna draw, but I'm only gonna use these colors. Another really good one is values. So there's this concept called value keying, which is, when you're standing there and you're looking out in real life to something that you want to paint, you're probably going to see everything from black to all the way white in terms of value, which is the black and white quality of things. And value actually has a really interesting quality when you start to reduce it. So you don't go all the way from black to all the way white. You can reduce it so that everything that you're doing is really light and really kind of like, maybe it's white to somewhere like 50% gray, and you're only using values above that. You're actually going to drastically change the way that your painting feels. And so you can probably picture in your mind some artists that do that. And so this happens when it comes to like the range of values. So you can do it really light, or you can do it really dark, or you can use everything light to dark. But there's also the quality, not just of what is the value range, but like how much of a certain group of values is there. So if you can use all the values, all the way black to all the way white, but majority of the painting is really dark. So I'm just saying this to say that when you start to reduce the factors that you're using, and these could be things like line work or colors, values, edge quality, every time you make a reduction, every time you just say, I'm only going to work within these parameters, then you're actually going to be heavily affecting the style. And this is an amazing thing to play with, because it means that you start to be able to see the function. Like, okay, so I want to make a painting and I want it to feel really happy. You can actually reduce the values so that you have less dark and more light, and your painting's going to feel happier. Or you can use like just sort of in these kind of like oranges and yellows, and there's a certain sort of happiness to that. And so in your search of trying to find a style, probably one of your biggest tools is the tool of reducing what it is you're using in order to communicate. And then the question no longer can be, is this accurate? because in that instance, accurate doesn't exist, which is really interesting, because then you start to look at the fact that none of our screens and none of the paints we use will ever accurately reproduce what it is that we're seeing. So you start to realize everything we do is a reduction. And you start to be able to sort of build this little map in your head of, when I do this, it's going to feel like that. And when I do this, it's going to feel like that. And this will bring you to a style, because it will enable you to be able to do what you want in order to achieve what you want to achieve, which is really cool.
And avoid what you don't want.
And avoid what you don't want to achieve. Exactly. This podcast is brought to you by my online painting courses. Now, whether you want to learn to paint landscapes in any medium, to figure out how gouache works, to work your way through form and rendering to make your paintings pop and feel lifelike, or you want to learn how to make hand-painted anime backgrounds, I have exactly what you need. My goal is to help you become a proficient and confident artist, and I'm really excited to see that happen. Now, you can find these courses in the link below, and I can't wait to share everything I know with you. But for now, let's get back to the podcast. This is the way to find a style, is to play these little games of, I'm only going to use these colors, or I'm only going to use these values, or I'm only going to use these kinds of things. And in playing with this, it goes from, is my painting right, or wrong, and you switch into, instead of that, what is the effect of what I'm doing with my paintings? What's the overall effect? How did that feel? And every single painting that you start playing like this with is going to mean that next time when you say, I want to paint and I want it to feel happy, or I want to paint and I want it to feel foreboding, you know a little bit more about how to do that. And you're going to become much more in touch with your intentions and with how to achieve your intentions. And this is lifetime work, lifetime play. Like, this will last forever. But every single time you do it, it's adding to this giant library in your head about, how do I get what I want? And in doing so, you're building a vocabulary, and that vocabulary is your style, which is really cool. It also enables you to see where you actually have habits.
Yeah.
Because, like, a lot of the times you do things so unconsciously, and because you have to because of the million and one different ways that art works. You have to do things unconsciously, but working through this will show you that you did this thing unconsciously and that there are options.
I feel like art is just constant problem solving.
It is.
It is. It's just constant. Like, anytime I struggle with something, I sit and go, well, I'm just problem solving. And then next time this problem won't be as hard.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's why there's so many like coders and stuff that like art.
It's
Some
true.
people really like problem solving. It's like part of the fun.
That's what my husband, he's a software developer, and
Yes.
that's probably why we're able to, talk art so much. He's an artist, but he's a software developer, so his job is constant problem solving too.
It is. And the hard part is that it's problem solving, but there is no right and wrong.
No, there's not. It's just how you personally solve the problem.
Yeah. Okay. So let's wrap this up right here. If there's, and I'm just going to throw this out there, you might not have an answer, but if there's like 2 or 3 things that you would do in order to find your style, and we've probably talked about them already, but just to narrow down to say, if you're going to leave this right here and there's 2 or 3 things that you want to do in order to find your style, what would they be?
I would say, look at what other artists are doing. Stand on the shoulders of giants. See what the artists love are doing, and see how you can not just copy what one artist is doing, but find a bunch of different artists and see what you can kind of pick and choose, and then do applied studies. Try to figure out ways that you can apply maybe a little bit of what this guy's doing or this person's doing, and see and try and see how you like it with your own stuff. And if you don't like it, that's fine. Don't do it again. But that would probably be my personal.
Yeah, I think I basically shared what I think should be done. Aside from like agreeing that pulling together these giant mood boards and asking, what are the similarities? What are the things that are really cool? But also recognizing that somebody can do something really effectively and really compellingly, and you love it, but that not every decision they made was the best decision.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really big realization. Because you don't want to go in there and just try to copy everything. It's probably just these like 1 or 2 qualities that you actually are really being drawn to. What's your thoughts?
Well, I'm just thinking this up right now because it's something I want to try. I think that you could do an exercise where you take like one scene and try to do it in different style, like the exact same scene, do it in different variations of style, and see what things you like. Like,
see what resonates with you, what like makes you happiest.
I think your idea of doing the same subject in a number of different ways is really helpful, because a lot of the times people will find a style or something and just attach it to a single subject and then kind of pull it all together, which isn't terrible, but it doesn't help you to understand, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think that style is a lot to do with finding ways to solve the problem that are the easiest for you.
Yes.
Right.
Somewhere between easiest and most effective.
Oh, Yeah. I mean, if it solves the problem,
Right. If it does solve the
if
problem,
it's solving
yeah,
the problem, then whichever one's the easiest is why not? I think I don't know.
I love it.
I think it's also important to make the distinction of that not every art or art style that you love, you're necessarily going to love making.
Yeah.
So, which I think is
That,
where
that's probably
Yes.
what I meant. Mhm.
I think it's where when you apply and try, you're going to learn that. You're going to be like, oh, I love the way this looks. But when you go and try to make it yourself, it's not going to fulfill you. It's not going to make you're going to know once you try those applied studies and stuff if this makes you happy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's what I was talking about when I was saying that you can have a piece that you really enjoy by somebody else, and you shouldn't copy everything from it,
Mhm.
because the real hard part is narrowing down what it is that I actually like about it. Like, what is the effective
Yeah.
quality in this piece that I love? Why do I love it? And your first answer might not be the answer.
Well, when I was doing a lot of style exploration, I was noticing that I like looking at like what some different impressionistic artists will do. I think it looks really
Yeah.
cool. But then so I was like, well, I'll try it. And it just never clicked with me. Doing it never clicked with me. I ended up finding that really what clicked with me was almost this more like chunky, like lasso tool. I call it vector, but it's not vector, but like this
Sure.
kind of almost more
Yeah.
digital
Really
look. And
clean.
I would try this kind of painterly impressionistic stuff that I think is beautiful to look at. Like when somebody else does it, I'm like, oh, that's gorgeous. And then I do it and I'm just like, it just doesn't make me happy to make it.
Yeah.
So
I love it. All right, so you guys should if you don't feel like you have a style, you should go out there and play around with these ideas and let us know what has actually been helpful for you. Until next time, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
bye.